Hello, everybody. Welcome to video 3 of the blood glucose challenge. So today I'm going to be talking about looking for patterns in your blood glucose measurements and then tweaking the diet, you know, in a way that is going to improve those glucose levels. So in the last video, I spoke about using a spreadsheet or some kind of recording, mechanism. Spreadsheets I find the best, but you can just simply write it down as well. So what I'm going to do first is to bring up an example from a previous client, and then I'll kind of show you what I do with each client to find patterns and to tweak. Okay, so let me just share my screen. Okay, so this is previous client's spreadsheet. So you can see that there is the 3 days worth, the dates, the times, the blood sugar measurements, the food eaten, and a symptoms column. So let's start with what are we looking for? What kind of patterns are we looking for? What do we consider a spike? Because that's really important, okay? Because it's going to be probably a little bit different to what a doctor would consider a spike. I'm really looking for optimal blood glucose levels. We want to try and kind of nip this in the bud before it becomes pre-diabetes, okay? So the 24th of April was the first measuring date. And you can see there's a fasting time, the time of breakfast, and then 45 minutes later or 40 minutes later, she did the breakfast, after breakfast measurement, then lunch, after lunch, before dinner, dinner, and bedtime. Okay, so all of those are the times, and then you can see the blood glucose levels. So what I typically do is go through and look for anything that is either below 4 or above 7. Okay, that's for the, sorry, I should say below 3 and above 5 for fasting glucose, and below 3 or above 7 for after a meal, okay, or during the day. So these all look okay. This one here is obviously above 7. So I would flag that just in red. These ones look okay. This one's a little bit low, so I would flag that. 6.6, these are all okay. And then again, we've got a 7.1 down here, okay? So I would flag that one. So we just simply go in and flag, look, that one's also a bit high, the 5.5 fasting. Really anything above kind of the 5 or 5.1, I would flag for fasting. So what we then do is we go in and have a look at what was eaten prior to those spikes. Okay, so the first one was vegetable soup and a buttered bun. Now, because she doesn't tell me here what's in the vegetable soup, I have to assume that it's the buttered bun, and particularly the bun, right? So bread has a tendency to spike blood glucose, particularly white bread. And so that's what I would be assuming here is causing this spike. Now, moving down 3.9, there are no symptoms. So when blood glucose goes too low, typically if it's a problem, people often have symptoms like lightheadedness, shakiness, things like that. So if it's a once off and there's no kind of symptoms attached, I don't really put a lot of time into thinking about that. Sometimes you can just have a one-off kind of drop in glucose. So I wouldn't really be too concerned about this one here. Moving on to 5.5, that's definitely a little bit high. Now you can see that the night before, so the first thing I do when a fasting glucose is a bit high, especially when it's not consistently high on the other days, is I would look to see what was going on at bedtime the night before. And you can see that even though it's not above 7, it's quite high, right? So she's had salmon, veggies, and ice cream for dinner. And then a whole 4 hours later, she's still at 6.8. So you can imagine that if, after 4 hours, the blood glucose is still 6.8, if she had have done a test an hour after dinner, you can almost guarantee that that would have been much higher. This score would have been much higher when it peaked. So I would probably flag this knowing that information. So that would then tell me, again, depending on what the veggies were, like if the veggies were a big plate full of potatoes and sweet potatoes and starchy stuff, it could be partly to do with the veggies. But what screams here is the ice cream, right? Ice cream is typically very sugary unless you're getting a very specific, version that really doesn't have much sugar. But from memory, this was just plain old normal ice cream. And that's what I would assume would be the biggest contributor to that 6.8. So the 5.5 is likely to be elevated because of that previous night's 6.8. So that then tells me it's not as important, that 5.5, because it's explained by the night before. Okay, so I would kind of just move on to this next one, which is another 7.1, again, a vegetable salad and a plum. So my recollection is that this vegetable salad was just typical salad stuff. There was nothing kind of really obvious that would, contribute to an elevated blood glucose. So in this situation, I would assume it's the plum. So plums are, relatively high sugar fruits. And unfortunately, I think, that's what's contributed here. Now, that doesn't, even though it is high sugar, it still makes me think that's strange that one piece of fruit would cause such a spike. So I would again look to the previous score to see if that has contributed, and you can see that it has, right? So even though this one is the only one that's, actually over the 7, the majority of that I would assume is coming from the previous meal. So this is a much bigger spike from 5.5 to 6.8. And again, I would assume this is going to be probably the banana, because the other stuff isn't really carby, right? So you have to kind of start to look back at the previous scores. So what I see here is this elevated level the night before has contributed to starting the day poorly at a 5.5. So that means this increase here, typically if she was at a normal 4.5 for her, this wouldn't have been anywhere near as high. And that, the follow on from the plum probably wouldn't have been considered a spike. So I actually think that all of this third day is a result of this ice cream. That's kind of kept everything high at a baseline, and therefore it's coming up as a spike that probably wouldn't have been considered a spike had she not eaten that ice cream. Okay, so you can see the flow-on effects that one bad meal can have. Okay, so but you can see here that she's eaten rice down here. It hasn't had a bad impact, so rice seems okay. There's been potato mash here without an elevation, so hopefully, that's, I guess, a good indication that potato isn't spiking her. So for me, the main things here would be the bread and the ice cream, and then possibly a little bit of fruit down here. Looks like, at least she needs to be careful and not overeat from a fruit perspective. Okay, so that's what I do. Once I get the tracking back from each client. So then what I would do is write a list of kind of the potential problem foods for that person, at least with respect to blood glucose spikes. And, you're especially looking for things that might pop up multiple times, but even just once, we need to put them in the problem foods list for that person. Then what I would do is the first port of call is to remove all those foods that have come back as problematic, and then maybe just remove them, say, for a week, and then retest using this same method of 3 days, 5 to 8 times a day. And then what you do is bring, hopefully, in that retest, you've got much better scores. If you're just eating kind of non-starchy veggies, meats, eggs, that kind of thing, nuts maybe, then what you would do is bring one food back in at a time from the problem list and retest to see what your blood glucose is. So you would do it before and after eating. So the idea being that we're trying to pinpoint which actual foods are causing spikes for you. Okay. So yes, try that on your own and see if you can come up with a problem list, and then do that retesting. It's actually quite interesting when you start testing yourself. Okay, thanks so much. Bye.